I'm starting off to talk about the goals that we align our work to. The Oregon Health Authority has a strategic plan goal to eliminate health inequities by 2030. And in addition, we follow Healthier Together Oregon, which is Oregon's state health improvement plan for 2020 to 2024. Now, why am I telling you this? This is the exciting part, because we are making a really important and historic shift. We're implementing a regulatory framework that is really centered on client access and client safety. And we have to do that by taking a drug policy framework mindset that's rooted in the war on drugs and shift it to a health policy framework that really shows promise for healing and wellness. And that's very exciting to us. So I'm telling you all of this because I want you to know that all of you that are interested in being licensed under Measure 109 are really incredibly important to us. Part of this is the goals of the State Health Improvement Plan and really highlighting economic barriers to health. All of you who are brave and coming forward to get licensed and become small business owners, really it's important that your economic health is successful and that you have a foundation to continue doing this work. So I want to mention this before I start talking a little bit about the measure. First of all, for many of you probably already know this, but I'll start by giving a brief overview. Measure 109 creates a regulatory framework for both the production of psilocybin and the provision of psilocybin services. Under Measure 109, a client can access psilocybin services for any reason, and although they don't need a prescription or a referral from a provider, because this is not a medical or clinical model, the client does have to go through a preparation session with a licensed facilitator. That preparation session is a very important time where they go through client intake, they talk about informed consent, risks and benefits of psilocybin, and also client bill of rights. Many of these recommendations came from our Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board and the many people that serve on the subcommittees that were organized by the board. And so I also want to honor them as we're talking about this. So after that preparation session, a client can decide whether or not they want to move forward with scheduling an administration session. An administration session happens at the licensed service center and is the only place where psilocybin can be sold to a client by a licensed service center or consumed by a client during that administration session. It's really important to note that we have draft rules out, and I hope you're all paying attention to that process. I'll talk about it a little bit later. Those draft rules will really set some details about the regulations around the three parts of psilocybin services. And the administration session, there will be a minimal duration that someone has to stay at a licensed service center depending on the dosage of psilocybin that they consume. So I just wanted to mention that. The administration session is the psilocybin journey, and it is a non-directive approach, and it happens, again, under the presence of a licensed facilitator. Then there's an integration session, which is an opportunity for that client and a licensed facilitator to really sit down and talk together. The client can be referred to community resources and also to peer support networks that exist in the community. And it's a really great time to review safety and support planning and anything else that might support a client as they process and integrate that journey. I will just say quickly as well that I'll talk about some of the licensing, but it's just really important to, when you're talking about Measure 109, to understand that from the state perspective, Measure 109 is basically the statutory container that we do our work within. No matter how much we want to do something or not do something, we have to stay within our statutory authorities. So as you hear me speak today, I'm speaking from what the state can and cannot do, and then the rules are kind of filling out the places that we decide to land in between. So I want to talk a little bit about anyone that's interested in becoming licensed as facilitators. As Tom mentioned, facilitators are really, really important to psilocybin services. There are some requirements. I won't go through all of these, but it's important to know that facilitators will be 21 years of age or older, and they'll have a couple of other requirements like passing a background check and a high school diploma or equivalent. But psilocybin facilitators will have to go through an OHA-approved training program We're going to talk about that on the next slide, so I'll just kind of bookmark that for now. What I want to say is part of being a facilitator is going through that training program, also passing a comprehensive skills exam that is administered by the training program, as well as passing an exam that's administered by OHA, by our team. That'll be more of like a regulations-based exam. There's some considerations for facilitators. We think that there's a lot of benefit to having a wide variety of facilitators from diverse backgrounds, folks from very different lived and professional experiences that can come together and provide culturally responsive psilocybin services to their communities. We know that by being able to do so, you can reduce harm, especially to those folks who have been traumatized by, institutional bias or the effects of racism. And so it's really important that we have facilitators that can represent communities and provide services to clients in a way that they're most comfortable. So I just want to mention that there's a lot of benefit, a lot of really important opportunity with licensed facilitators benefiting the health of our state and anyone that accesses psilocybin services. I mentioned the non-directive approach. That is something that is codified in statute, so that is important to recognize. Facilitators will be present, supporting a client through psilocybin services, but not directing the client. This is really an interesting measure where a client has the agency to direct their experience with a licensed facilitator. Also, many people want to know who else will be licensed facilitators? What about licensed professionals in Oregon? We've had a huge amount of interest from licensed counselors, therapists, social workers, psychologists, and many others who are interested in becoming facilitators. If that's one of you, please check in with your professional licensing boards here in Oregon. That's really important. They're the ones that can share with you the potential risks involved with being associated with a Schedule I substance, but also being involved with being perhaps a facilitator here in Oregon. For those of you that are DEA licensed prescribers, there's probably a much bigger risk because of the conflict with federal law. So we do see that that's probably going to be a big issue. But please check in with your professional licensing boards and have that conversation. We did reach out last year and had some great conversations. And ultimately, it's really important to know that they're the folks you need to talk to. There's also going to be a lot of addressing scope of practice. Our team will be licensing and regulating facilitators for Measure 109, but there are some considerations to doing that. One person would not practice on one scope of practice under Measure 109. They would have to practice, separate those two practices and follow all of the requirements for a licensed facilitator. What does that mean? That means that there are some considerations, such as mandatory reporting and other issues that, again, you'll want to talk to your professional licensing board about, and really, as a professional, make that determination. All of that said, we see a huge benefit to having a great network of facilitators and folks that can refer. Maybe they meet with a client and they decide that the client might be better served by another facilitator. Having that network of referrals might be really, really helpful. I've talked about culturally responsive psilocybin services, and I'll just say that the hope is that we're building a great community of networks related to facilitators, and hopefully there'll be a lot of vast knowledge and experience that can really help benefit clients. I'm going to talk about the training programs now. Many of you already are aware of this if you're a part of training programs, but for those of you that are interested in being licensed under Measure 109, it's important to know about the training program piece. OHA does not have the statutory authority to license and regulate training programs. There's another state agency that does that, and we found that out recently. They're the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and their goal is to really center on consumer protection for students. So what we do is approve curriculum under Measure 109. And we knew that this was a huge priority to community members, to the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, and to lots of people we spoke with. And so Last year, we decided to expedite the training program rules so that we could begin accepting applications, approving curriculum, so those training programs could start getting students trained in time to apply for facilitator licenses as close to January as possible. I just want to mention that if you're someone that wants to be trained and you want to be a student of a training program, you can go onto our website and you can find a list of approved training programs. I believe we've approved 14 to date, which is really exciting. And just make sure that you have a conversation with them. We've got a lot of great training programs available, and just wanted to make sure that also if you're going to submit an application for curriculum approval as a training program, you'll really want to make sure that you understand the HEC licensure piece. And the HEC, again, is the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. I won't stay on that too much, but if you have questions later, I'm happy to answer them. I'm going to talk about licensed manufacturers now. You can see I put a lot of things on the slide for you to know and so that you can reflect on later. But for most of our licensees, there are specific regulations that I just want to highlight. You would want to refer to ORS 475A, which is where Measure 109 is codified in Oregon law. And then pay attention to our rules to get the to get the details of where we're going to land when we adopt final rules at the end of this year. But to begin, manufacturers are those folks who are licensed to cultivate psilocybin or process psilocybin products. Manufacturer sites are licensed premises that have defined boundaries. They cannot cultivate outdoors. Under Measure 109, it has to happen indoors, and it cannot happen on public lands. There's a land use compatibility statement that must be submitted to OHA when the applicant applies for a manufacturer license. A land use compatibility statement, and you'll hear this a lot throughout the presentation, but it's really an opportunity for folks to work with their local planning departments to make sure that they're in compliance with local land use and zoning laws. And that's a requirement before we can issue a license. Now, there's a lot of other characteristics and responsibilities involved with manufacturing licenses. I'll just say that we do have to set production limits according to statute. So there will be production limits to meet the needs of psilocybin services in Oregon. Also, the manufacturers will enter information into a psilocybin product tracking system, and that will begin with cultivation and the movement of the product, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I would just say that we did adopt some rules earlier this year when we expedited rules, and so for those folks out there that are interested in manufacturing and you want to apply for a license, it's important to see those rules and know that we'll have more that we adopt later this year. We are in a rulemaking process right now. And for those rules that have already been adopted, we decided to start with one species of psilocybin-producing mushroom to begin with, and that's Psilocybin cubensis. That was at the recommendation of our Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board. And while we know that there are over 200 different species of mushrooms that produce psilocybin, we wanted to start with something that we could build trust with throughout the Oregon communities and with the federal government. And we know that there'll be more conversations as we evolve this work out, and the diversity of our products is something, and the species is something we'll talk about. There are some allowances in rule for the types of endorsements you can have to process psilocybin, basically the different product types. This is dried whole fungi. This is ground homogenized fungi that can be encapsulated or stirred into teas. This is extracts, as well as edible products, something that you could maybe put into chocolate, for example. Please pay attention to all of those rules if you're interested in manufacturing, and happy to take questions. There's a lot that you'll need to know that are in our draft rules, and I'll talk about that process at the end of this presentation. Testing labs. So once manufacturers cultivate products, the products will be tested by testing labs. These folks have to be accredited by the Oregon Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, and according to the rules that we adopted earlier this year, they will test for species identification as well as potency. We've tried not to overburden the testing, so if we think we need to test for heavy metals, pesticides, or microbials because of a public health issue or a safety issue, then we'll request that test to be done. But we just wanted to highlight, as we're developing these rules, we're trying to make sure that we're looking at public health and safety, we're looking at what we have the administrative capacity to accomplish, but we're also looking at equity and access and really trying to be mindful of how much work it is to comply with statute and rule. So I won't go too much into the testing labs except to say that they'll also be entering information into the psilocybin product tracking system. Now, if you're here and you're interested in being licensed as a service center, this is really important because service centers are the only place where psilocybin can be sold to a client or consumed by a client, and where the administration session takes place. Manufacturers, once the testing results have been entered into the product tracking system, will sell product to the licensed service centers. And so if you want to be a licensed service center, there's a number of important requirements to consider. Similar ones to the manufacturer, cannot be located on public lands, have to be a defined premises, have to have a land use compatibility statement. But another thing to keep in mind for a service center is you cannot be licensed if you are already subject to another statute, which is called ORS 441. Measure 109 directs that if you are subject to this statute, which means you're a medical facility, such as a hospital, extended stay center, that you would not be able to be licensed as a service center in Oregon. So it's really important to know that statute. I'm happy to answer questions. But it's really important to also understand that there's a number of other possibilities that we're trying to address in rule related to co-location to create opportunities for service centers. We also know that service centers can look very different depending on the approach and what they want to accomplish as far as set and setting and what they want to offer to clients. There's a number of requirements. Every licensee will have to be, and applicants will have to pass a background check, have to be 21 years of age or older. There's a residency requirement. There's also, for manufacturers and service centers, a financial interest requirement that's important to know. You can have one financial interest in a manufacturer, but you can have up to 5 for service centers. We can get into that a little bit more. But I think what's important here is a licensed service center will be transferring product to a client. And there's going to be a lot that we establish in rule. So I would just really encourage all of you, if you're interested in creating a service center and being licensed under Measure 109, to really pay attention to our rulemaking process that's going on right now. We have rules advisory committees that are meeting until the 30th, and then there's a public comment period November 1st through the 21st. So, worker permits. This is another piece that's important if you're going to set up a business. All employees that do certain kinds of work within service centers and manufacturer sites will have to be permitted. And they must be 21 years of age or older and pass a background check. We're going to talk about background checks if we have time a little bit later. But briefly, it's just important to note that we're really working hard to make this process as streamlined and simple as possible, but do keep in mind that your workers will have to be permitted. So under Measure 109, we're going to talk about the fee-based program, so I won't get into this too much, but service centers also will have to charge a tax on the retail sale of product that's sold to clients. That tax is, you have to remit this tax to the Oregon Department of Revenue. And I believe they're going through rulemaking and really working on that. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but please be aware of those rules and understand your responsibility to remit that tax back to the Department of Revenue. Once they take their administrative cost, they'll send whatever's left over, if there's anything left over, to us to support our program. And we just don't know right now what those costs and those taxes will look like. I want to get into the conversation about challenges, and this is where I want to, highlight some important issues and considerations for all of you as you embark on this journey for licensure. There is a local government issue going on right now. Under Measure 109, local governments, meaning cities or counties, have the ability to adopt ordinances to prohibit psilocybin service centers and manufacturers from operating in their local jurisdictions. And so we're trying to pull together a list, but we're really encouraging folks to look on the Secretary of State's local filings website and to see if this affects you in your local area. There have been I think 123 ordinances adopted, and those ordinances will be passed to voters at the next general statewide election. And if voters approve of those ordinances, then we will not be able to issue licenses in those specific areas. So please, if you want to be licensed and have a manufacturer or service center license, please make sure you know what's going on in your local area. And in November, after the election, we'll have some more information. If local governments decide not to adopt ordinances, they will be able to set reasonable time, place, and manner regulations. This could be hours of operation, zoning laws, and other pieces related to what we call TPMs. So it's really important that you're working with your local areas and understanding what those are. Even if in rules we adopt a specific requirement for hours of operation, your local governments can go a little bit more stringent and have different requirements. And so that's just important to note. We won't be tracking all of the local time, place, and manner regulations. We will be regulating to what's established in rule, but it's really important that you understand what's happening in your local area. I've talked about the land use compatibility statement, so I won't get into it too much. I will just say we've worked as a team on the Lux form, and it is on our website, so hopefully that'll be of service to local governments and to all of you, and that'll be helpful as you start to work with local governments to get licensed. There are many issues with access and affordability, and I want to talk about those really briefly. We are a fee-based structure, which means that the cost of licensing fees have to cover the cost of our section's work. That's challenging. Now, if we have thousands of licensees, that makes the license fees much smaller and much more affordable. If not, then it makes them much higher. It's really a math problem, and it's something that we're hoping in the future can be addressed by additional funds that are outside of our fee-based structure that can help support subsidizing cost for licensees or subsidizing the cost of psilocybin services for clients. But until we get there, I just want to make sure everyone knows we're doing what we can. We are trying to keep our costs low. We're trying to make sure that we're streamlining every part of our work and setting up processes and procedures that are really user-friendly for all of you that are going to be licensed, and also making sure that we're not taking on too much work that then would require more staffing. All of that said, we have to get budget authority through the Oregon legislature, and then we designate how much we think we need, and they tell us if they approve or disagree, and at the end of the day, we have a budget. That budget is the number we have to get to with licensure fees. So you'll see proposed fees in the draft rules. We are very concerned about affordability, but we are hamstrung right now at what we can do about that until we get more of an understanding of the landscape after we start accepting applications in January of 2023. We have recognized from some great recommendations and conversations through our Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board and our subcommittees how important it is to create opportunities for access for licensure fees. So we do have a reduced fee schedule if people meet certain criteria. We don't have the statutory authority to regulate the cost of psilocybin products or services, so that is all up to the business owners to determine how they're going to do that. I just want to mention briefly that as we do decision making, we have to think about the public health and safety requirements. There's also this delicate balance with federal considerations. As we get started, we're unraveling bias and stigma against psilocybin. And to do that, we have to build trust within our communities across the state, as well as with the federal government. So, we're kind of trying to walk that balance right now, and also because we are the Oregon Health Authority, we do think of the public health impacts. There's also, again, many considerations for different folks that are coming in with professional licensure, and they also have a delicate balance to navigate with their professional licensing boards and being licensed under Measure 109. So, as we sort of continue to identify different issues with the implementation of the measure, we look forward to evolving that work, working with our advisory board, listening to members of the public, and really finding solutions for these problems as we move forward. I want to talk briefly about client confidentiality. I'm trying to move through this so I can get to your questions. Mandatory reporting, I mentioned. If you are a licensed professional and you're subject to mandatory reporting, and that means 24 hours a day, there are some conversations coming up about how do you navigate that if a client is in the middle of a psilocybin journey and there's information about abuse. How does that get reported? How do you work with that when someone's in a vulnerable state? There are questions about data collection. How do we make sure that we know the impact of our work, but also how do we do that in a way that honors client confidentiality and really gives the client the opportunity to decide what information can be released and what they can't. Those are also considerations when we talk about the federal government. If the federal government requests information, how do we try to maintain as much client confidentiality as we can? So these are just considerations, lots of great conversations as we move forward. I want to also highlight something really important about background checks. And this is an example of how we're really trying to center a justice, equity, a diversity and inclusion perspective as we build this work. We're trying to really be equity-centered. Background checks can be completely difficult for some people that have convictions. And just because you have a conviction doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be a good licensed facilitator. And so we understand that we're unraveling bias and stigma against psilocybin, but we're also looking into oppressive policies that have affected people from communities who are Black, Indigenous, other people of color, tribal community members, and we know that we've got a lot of work to do. So what we did is we moved our background checks to our shared services folks at the background check unit, who do tens of thousands of background checks every year for the Oregon Department of Human Services and the Oregon Health Authority. You're probably wondering, so what? Why does this matter? What they do at BCU, that's what we call them for short, is they do a weighing test. So even if you have a conviction on your record, they're going to be weighing that information. They're going to be talking to you, receiving more information, and making a determination if you are a risk to vulnerable people or if your conviction is not a risk. And that might be an opportunity to, have more inclusivity into this work and really have people, facilitators who are representing communities who have been in the system and been traumatized and understand what that's like. So I just wanted to mention we're doing this work. They have a strong infrastructure, which means that reduces cost, and it also helps us in our licensing team to not have bias related decision making, so that we don't need to know about your convictions. We don't need to know about your record. We need to know that you meet the criteria in statute and rule, and that you've passed a background check through the background check unit. So I hope that's a helpful illustration. I know I'm going through this very quickly. I'm running out of time, and I could talk to you for hours. But I do want to mention that. So background checks will be a part of this work. And there's this consideration for how your life experience could actually be of service to the community, and we understand that. I want to talk briefly about the journey ahead. We have this fabulous team, some of which are here today, amazing professionals dedicated to this work, and just really, really smart, wonderful people, and I want to honor the team. They're doing a lot of hard work. We have been 6 team members until just a couple of weeks ago, and now we're a team of 8. We should be a team of 21. And so there is an infrastructure issue for hiring right now with state government. COVID-19 response really kind of, created a lot of stagnant issues. And so I just want to mention that our team is doing great work. We're building a licensing team, we're building a compliance team, and we're trying to be of service to all of you who are interested in being licensed. We are not a business organization. We are a health organization. So what we're doing is trying to work with the Secretary of State's Office of Small Business Assistance because they know about business and they're there to help serve you all. And so we're gonna be doing a fall forum on October 19th. It's free, open to the public, it's Zoom, but this is where you learn about banking, insurance challenges, 280E, and the challenges about being able to have tax breaks when you're working with a Schedule I substance. This is where you're gonna learn about potential technical assistance that's available to you, and perhaps in some places what might be more culturally responsive technical assistance. So I want you all to be invited and to come be supported and come to that forum. We will be there to offer as much information as we can. We are in rulemaking, which means this is an important process. This is the advisory board made recommendations to OHA according to statute and did an incredible job. That served as kind of the backbone for our draft rules. Thank you, advisory board and subcommittee members, for your hard work. I'm applauding you all many times. But from that rulemaking process, now we have rules advisory committees that are meeting, discussing rules, and then it will turn to a public comment period November 1st through the 21st. That is a time for you to get involved in that rulemaking process. We will have training once we have a product tracking system for service centers and manufacturers and your permitted workers to learn how to use that system, as well as how to learn our training program, licensing, and compliance case management system, which we call TLC, and we do invite lots of TLC songs whenever we have this conversation. We have a great soundtrack. But we will teach you how to use that system, and it's also really easy to navigate. Our team has done great work on it. The point is we're gonna be doing a lot of training. We're gonna try to support you as much as possible. We are venturing into this journey with you as partners, providing education and technical assistance, trying to navigate the bumps in the road, and also trying to make sure that the world sees how important this work is and how much we can provide and improve the health of Oregonians and provide relief to people. So I just wanna say thank you so much. There's our website. And I just want to say thank you for being here, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions might come up.
Thanks. You also mentioned a really great event that the Oregon Health Authority is putting on. Can you tell us a little bit more about how to find out the address, the location, where that might be taking place, and if there are other resources available to folks who would like to get involved in this process?
Absolutely. The Fall Forum will be listed on our website. Our team made a really beautiful picture, and so you'll find all the details, the Zoom links, and all of that information. So please visit our website for more. I will say that the Secretary of State's Office of Small Business Assistance has worked with us, and we've partnered together to invite different state agencies to come to the table. State government is not easy to understand. I have worked in it for a decade, and I still stumble. I still wonder how people navigate the system. We don't want you all having to do that. So we're trying to bring it to all of you in the best of our ability with the resources we have. And part of the guests that will be speaking, we'll have folks talking about lessons learned from cannabis. We'll have folks talking about, some of the banking, insurance, and 280E considerations. We'll hear from, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. We'll hear from the Background Check Unit. We'll hear from the Department of Agriculture if you're planning to do edibles. You'll hear from Environmental Public Health if you're going to have a kitchen. There's all kinds of different ways that state agencies might touch this work, and so we want to build a partnership, bring folks together, and also build a community where state agencies are listening, and we know how important that is. So please sign up, and we look forward to seeing you there. We will have Spanish interpretation, American Sign Language interpretation, cart captioning, and anything else that you request.
Thanks, Angela.
Yeah.
What was the most surprising thing to you during this process?
That is a great question as well. So I could talk forever about this, but something I want to just mention is what surprises me is the timing. There's this really amazing timing happening. This work is so important, making sure we have representation from people who have been left out of access for centuries, who have been affected by oppressive policies, and now we're unraveling bias and stigma against fungi, against psilocybin. We're learning from the centuries of use from indigenous communities, and we're doing it under the umbrella of an agency who has come out and said, we've made lots of mistakes. People have not been served well by government. We have broken our trust with community, and now it's time to center community. The Public Health Division brought in over 177 community organizations to be part of the public health system. So it's not just government, it's government and community. And that's incredible. We're working to, really address the harm that's been created against certain communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, tribal communities, people with disabilities, people of low incomes, people in rural areas, veterans. I could keep going on, immigrants, refugees. You can see the point. The system hasn't served everyone well, and we acknowledge that, and we're working at an agency that acknowledges that. And what a better time for this network to bring us together to make this historic work happen. So that's the surprising thing for me, is the divine timing of it all. The other really big surprise is we have this incredible amount of community. We have the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board. Incredible people, great knowledge and experience coming together to really tackle very difficult issues, as well as subcommittee members who have decided to dedicate time and volunteer time to this work. The public who have participated, partners. We've done culturally responsive community circles to come together in a space that feels comfortable and is off, that sort of like public limelight. We've done what we can to really listen and hear from folks. And I think that what surprises me the most is how much energy there is to make this successful. Even within state government, I hear every day people like, you know what, I really want this to work. I am gonna prioritize this thing because this work is important. This is incredible. Look at what you're all doing. Our team is working on long-term, looking at the long term. We're looking at program evaluation. We're looking at changing work culture, centering our own health so we can model this important work culture that has been really destructive to people for so long. And so we're doing that together. We're building it. This team is building it together. And so we're hoping that, unlike the past, we're building a new kind of environment where people are inclusive, the egos are stripped away, and we start becoming partners in collaboration, and we really start assuming the best and working together for the success of the measure. So I guess I'll stop there, because otherwise you might fall asleep. But
Thanks, Angie.
Yes.
So questions finally started popping up, and I know we are running out of time, but I wanted to get to the most upvoted question for you. And that is, will licensed facilitators only be able to work with clients at a permitted service center, or could a facilitator work with a client in nature or their home?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me start here. The measure requires that the administration session, where psilocybin is sold to a client and consumed by a client, that has to take place at a licensed service center. We're going to be adopting rules, but we want to create opportunities for licensed facilitators to do preparation sessions or integration sessions that might not happen at a licensed service center. The business relationship between a licensed service center and a licensed facilitator, that's between all of you to build together. But the one requirement is that the psilocybin has to be sold by a licensed service center to a client, and the client has to consume that psilocybin on site, and the actual psilocybin journey has to take place at that licensed service center. We want to create enough space for you all to create and really sort of reflect the approach that you want to offer. And I think that's up to all of you based on where we land with rules and also what's within the statutory container. Great question.
Thanks so much, Angela. I think we are out of time. But thank you so much for being with us here today. And again, I think if folks have other questions for Angela, she will be around. Thank you so much.
Thank you.